I've been on my journey now, you appreciate the fact that the highest performing teams in the world, including special forces from around the world, are deliberately composed of individuals who have very little overlap of professional competence. They have massive overlap in terms of trust, dependence, discipline, personal vision, but skill set is different. And I think that is very valuable. Do you know how intimidated I am right now on a Thursday afternoon? Very is the answer, but anyway, yeah, great to be here.
India is an intimidating country.
You're right, yeah, I've learned that. I've learned that over many years.
How long have you been in India now?
So my association with your country started almost exactly 30 years ago. And perhaps I'll tell you how and why, but I've been coming back ever since as a tourist, as someone who ended up being in the military and serving with your military, and now I'm a proud Indian entrepreneur. And so I have come today not to impart any advice whatsoever, ladies and gentlemen, but to learn from you about Indian entrepreneurship.
So you've been a pilot, you've worked with the king and queen, more so than king, I'm guessing.
No?
No? Okay,
King and queen.
King and queen, okay. And then you led Standard Chartered, and now you're in India running a finance company. So that to me sounds like an incredibly confused person.
Yeah, I am. You've summarized it brilliantly well. I am confused.
Yeah.
I'm also run my life, I often say I run my life on two platforms. One of them is WhatsApp, as we all do here in India, and the other one is serendipity. I think I'm a firm believer in you never quite know where life is going to take you, but opportunities pass all of us every single day, and it's whether we choose to seize those opportunities. And perhaps, do you want me to give a couple of minutes perhaps
That's what I meant to ask.
On why this random foreigner is sitting in front of you right now?
Why should we be listening to a white guy?
Good question. Maybe you'll listen, but don't take any advice, okay? That's the golden rule. So first of all, my name is Richard Pattle, and I'm originally a Brit, born in the UK, in a rural area. If any of you have been to the UK, anyone been to London or UK here? Handful of people. Anyone heard of a place called Shropshire? No, exactly. I mean, imagine rural India, the most rural of rural India. It's the equivalent. So I was born there. I had a very privileged childhood. Parents were very wealthy. Lived in a great big mansion, went to a private school. Life was looking pretty rosy. And one day I came home and my parents were traveling. I noticed my parents had been very stressed. I was about 15 or 16 at the time, and they weren't out. And suddenly there was a knock at the door, a big driveway and horses and the rest of it, and swimming pools and tennis courts and stuff. And these two guys who I'd never seen before were at the door, and I looked up at them, you know, and I wasn't quite as tall as I am now. And I said, hello, my parents are out, what would you like? And they said, we're the bailiffs, and we're repossessing your house. Your parents are in a huge amount of debt, and we'll give you an hour or so to leave the house, and then we're changing the locks and taking over the house and all of the grounds. And so that day I left that house with a little suitcase with the most important things in life when you're a teenager, record collection, number one, a little bit of school books and stuff, and a few clothes. And the upshot is I never went back into that house. We never saw any of our family belongings again. About 15, 16. And my parents were bankrupt. And so they ended up sleeping in cars. We had no house. Fortunately...
Did you have siblings?
I had two siblings as well. We're all in the same boat. And we lost everything. And so I sit here before you, not as a guy who's had a silver spoon in his mouth, or maybe I did to begin with, but I certainly didn't have it later. And life was looking pretty depressing. I also, at that point in time, I'd always wanted to be a pilot. I'd applied to the Royal Air Force to be a pilot, applied to British Airways, and I bombed every single application. And then I had a lucky break, a second chance, and ended up going back to the Royal Air Force a second time for assessment. They foolishly let me in. They sponsored me through university, and I was commissioned into the Royal Air Force. In fact, I was commissioned exactly 35 years and 2 days ago
Oh, wow.
into the Royal Air Force, and I was a pilot, and I was going through my jet training in the UK. And we used to have in those days a program where you could go anywhere in the world. It's called Advanced Leadership Training, but it had to have a philanthropic or adventure leadership angle to it. And so as a kid, when I was growing up, I'd read a lot about India, and I'd read about India's, thousands of year old history. I'd written, read obviously about the British chapter in your country. And I was fascinated about India there, and particularly in the early 90s, just coming through the period of deregulation. And so I said to the rest of my 6 British Royal Air Force pilots, guys, why don't we go to India for a month? And they looked at me and they was like, well, we rather thought we'd go like speedboat driving in Australia or skydiving in California or whatever, but I'm a persuasive guy. So 2 months later, we rocked up here in this city, exactly 30 years ago, and jumped on a train, went to the British High Commission first, then jumped on a train, went down to Bhopal and spent a month in an eye hospital there. And I think by the time the train had arrived at Bhopal, I'd fallen in love with this country. And I spent, perhaps we'll chat about it later, but I spent 18 years in the military.
What kind of planes did you fly?
I specialized as a combat helicopter pilot, so I did jet training, but then specialized in helicopters. I served in a couple of campaigns, the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the invasion or the liberation of Kosovo in the late 90s, and also I did 3 years in Northern Ireland on counterterrorism duties. And I did, as you do in the military, I'm sure you've got some military families here, interspersed with tours at the Ministry of Defence. So that was chapter number 1, big, strong association with India. And notably during that chapter, I served, I was down in Tamil Nadu. Have we got anyone from Tamil Nadu here? A few. So anyway, everyone heard of a place called Coonoor, near Ooty? Anyway, so I was there serving with your Indian men and women from the Navy, from the Air Force, and from the Army, and spent a year with my family here. That was 16 years ago. So that was chapter 1. Chapter 2, very briefly, is I worked for the British royal family, for the then Prince of Wales, but now King and Queen. Did that for around 10 years as Chief Operating Officer, Master of the Household. Used to come back to India with them, and they are very involved in this country.
Sorry, let me double click on that. You said the Chief Operating Officer of what?
So of the royal household. So royal households around the world have a team of courtiers that work for them that do a variety of different activities, ranging from policy, writing speeches and so on, to advising them, but also running things. And so I was called Master of the Household and ran the operations for the then Prince of Wales before he...
Do they recruit from India?
Well, do you know they do? They absolutely do. In the royal household, we did it. We had, he has got many charities. One of them, in fact, is called the British Asian Trust, which started in 2006. But also there's a big focus on the Commonwealth. And so we absolutely had people in the royal household who were seconded from countries across the Commonwealth, including India. So associations with India were there. Then, as you mentioned, I worked for Standard Chartered. I wasn't quite running the bank, sadly. I was vice chairman of the private bank globally, based out of London. Used to come to India during that.
How did that shift happen? Like from, Army to Chief Operating Officer to finance?
Yeah, Army, Air Force to Chief Operating Officer was because the first job that I did for them, I actually did 2 roles. One was Equerry. These are quite historic titles, a bit confusing, but probably Chief of Staff is probably the closest corporate equivalent. I did that for 2 years, and then Master of the Household. But after that, I wanted to go into the private sector, and so I guess I just went for lots of, cups of coffee once I decided I was going to leave, and serendipity hoved into view, and I ended up getting a job with Standard Chartered. And I loved it. It's a great bank.
What was the job?
My job, I knew nothing about finance. In fact, I started working for them in 2014, so about 10 years ago. I actually did a business degree back in the UK, but I'd obviously been in the military, and finance hadn't been my big thing. And then, but I pitched up, and I think the former CEO of Standard Chartered said, Richard, come and join banking. I think I was then 44 years old. Come and join banking for the first time in your life. Get to know everything there is to know: investment banking, retail banking, corporate banking, private banking. Then work your way up, and perhaps you'll be the CEO of a small territory, and then maybe a country, and then maybe a region. And I, day one, looked down in the city of London at all these little ants crawling around, about millions of people, all going about their work. And I thought, listen, I'm 44. Like, you guys at your age, like, you've got 20 years head start on me. So I thought, that's crazy. Why would I do that? So why don't I try and leverage what I've done before, and what did I know about? A tiny bit. I knew about putting people together, and private banking is very territorial. And so I tried to stitch together this amazing community of the biggest business houses across Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, number one. Number two, philanthropy has always been close to my heart. Again, when I was working for the Prince, I was involved in a couple of his charities on the board and so on. So I knew a tiny bit about that through osmosis. Next gen, I'm very passionate about, not just because I have 3 teenage children, but actually I think helping young people navigate their way through life, especially when they come from prominent, very wealthy families. And that sounds like a nice problem to have, and perhaps it is, but actually the pressure that those young men and women have is immense. It's a pressure. When I came from nothing, I had zero expectation from my peer group. In the audience, I'm sure we've got a mix of backgrounds, and that's brilliant. But those who are fortunate to come from prominent families, I'm sure you feel the pressure on your shoulder every day. And then lastly, it was really around revenue producing opportunities, putting people together around transactions that might bridge different bits.
So a lot of the lessons from Air Force, from having worked with the King and the Queen, sort of are transferable to what you end up doing in finance, right? Which is essentially bringing people together, bringing new revenue opportunities.
Yeah, I'd argue, although my careers have been very different, I'd argue that some of the things that I learned as a very young guy joining the military, and this is not exclusive to the British military. I know the Indian military very well. It's exactly the same here. It's the same in China. It's the same in the US, all over the world. Those building blocks, which is around trust and pushing yourself and exposure to danger and discipline and being reliant on others. That is all, I would argue, incredibly transferable to the corporate sector. It's just that when you're in the military, you don't think that. You only find that out later.
Did a lot of your friends do the same? Like after Air Force moved
I'd
to the
say
private
half
sector?
of them are British Airways pilots, Singapore Airlines with Emirates and so on. About half
do you miss
of us,
flying?
Yeah, I do. I do miss it, but I've been fortunate with my chapters. I'm a firm believer you can't look backwards. I've got great nostalgia. Do I want to be in a desert somewhere today, strapping into a hot helicopter, living in a tent? Probably not. I had amazing.
Did you have any near-death experiences or accidents?
Yes, fortunately, I didn't have. I'm still sitting here, but I've had many friends who are not here today, who sadly lost their lives either during training for conflict or during conflict itself. And but yeah, I mean, my career as a pilot, particularly as a helicopter pilot, you tend to do quite demanding flying. You do a lot of night flying on night vision goggles. You do a lot of formation flying, and that is pretty close to another helicopter going at 160 miles an hour, perhaps 100 feet off the ground at night on night vision goggles, no lights on, and you've got a formation of 4 of you, and you're in a conflict zone.
Can you tell us some stories from that time?
Yeah, listen, I mean, there are. I'd
Whatever
say
is not.
flying. Have we got any pilots in the audience, by the way? Have we got anyone who flies?
We have someone in the cohort, I know for a fact. Yeah.
Okay, she's here. Is anyone who's afraid of flying in the audience as well? Okay, you need to leave right now, okay? No. No, there are experiences in your life where you think, wow, that was incredibly close. And I had experiences, two probably stick out in my mind. I think the invasion of Iraq in 2003, my squadron was bolted onto a United States Marine Corps squadron. And when you come up with a campaign plan, these things take months to develop, typically back at, in our case in the UK, back at the Ministry of Defence and at the headquarters of all of the three services, and then at joint level. And clearly there were contingency plans for the Iraq War stretching months back from when that happened. But once the decision was made at political level, as you will recall, by President Bush and Prime Minister Blair, very controversial, and I'll perhaps give you my views on it later, but when you're in the military, you get on with the job at hand. And my job at hand was to carry out the mission and to bring every single man and woman that I went to war with back with me to the UK at the end of the campaign. And pretty much everything else is secondary to that. But I think there are two incidents that stick in my mind about the military ethos. The first was the invasion was carried out, and it was a joint operation between the Americans leading the operation, but with countries such as the UK alongside. And in those first few hours, there was a Sea Knight US Marine Corps helicopter carrying 12 Royal Marines, British naval personnel, obviously the crew, American crew as well. And within hours of that operation, the aircraft crashed and all lives were lost in a huge fireball, which all of the squadron could see. It was on the main route into war, and a very vivid, but you carried on with the mission. And you carried on with the mission because to stop the mission is more dangerous than continuing. Mm-hmm. So I'd say that's number one. And then secondly, we've all had, close shaves. I had a very close shave in Oman. I was on a training exercise there as a young guy. I was flying with another pilot. It was at night. We were tired. We were on night vision goggles. There was almost no light. We were coming back to a base at sort of 3 o'clock in the morning. We were doing a casualty evacuation. And we were doing a circuit at about 100 feet or so coming into land. And I looked down. I wasn't handling the aircraft. I was navigating. And I looked down. I was doing some changing the radio channel and doing some duties. And the other guy who was flying got disorientated. And suddenly the helicopter, instead of being at 100 feet, started going into a dive. And I don't know what it was. To this day, I think to myself, it was some sixth sense. I just sensed something was wrong, even though my head was down here in the cockpit. And I suddenly looked up and I just felt I had to grab the controls. And I grabbed the controls and pulled in the collective. And as we climbed away from the ground, we had our windows open in the helicopter. We were so close to the ground that sand came into the cockpit. Yeah. I think if it had been another tenth of a second, I wouldn't be here. And I think the day afterwards, my wife phoned me on a satellite phone and she said, "Hey, how's it going out there?" And I said, "Oh, it's fine." I didn't tell her about it. She said, "Oh, I just thought I'd tell you. Great news from here. We're expecting our first child."
Oh, wow.
And it makes it very emotional when I think about it, because my first thought then was, can you imagine trying to get through to your husband to tell him that, and I wasn't there? Mm. And by coincidence, the co-pilot who was handling, we spoke about it later. He told me his wife also phoned him, funnily enough, about 2 weeks later, and said they were expecting their first child. So yeah, there are these experiences, but you learn, I think, to risk management is very important in the military. That's also now very important in finance, where I now am, and very important in everything that we do, and I'm sure in your startups.
I think Singapore and Israel, I think both are countries where you have to do
military service.
Military service, right?
Yeah. Mm.
And so when you have to do military service, I'm sure it sort of instills certain instincts in you that help you later in business. I've seen Israeli engineers, my friends were they were much, much better in terms of so many skills than even Indians or American counterparts. So do you think that I mean, if you were to build an education system, you would keep military service as sort of maybe at least 6 months to a year, almost like compulsory for all citizens?
I'm not sure whether it would be military service. I think there is something to be really said for some type of voluntary service that gives young men and women access to different disciplines. I have to say one of the greatest gifts that I was given by the military was the ability to mix with every type of person from across every single background. You know, you are by definition, I hope I'm not making an assumption here, gang, but you know, you are incredibly lucky to be in this institution. You have, I'm sure all of you have had amazing families that have helped you get here. You're very self-motivated. You, by definition, you're self-selecting. In the military, in any military, you have people from every single walk of life. Everything from, you know, future kings and queens through to the sons and daughters of people who are in prison or whatever it is. And I think particularly as a military officer, you mix with all of these people. And there are very few opportunities in life, particularly in corporate life, where you have the ability to get to know fellow human beings and to appreciate what you have and perhaps help them on their journey. So I think whether it's national service, military service, or something that gives you access and a broader perspective, I think that'd be very valuable, yeah.
Interesting. All right. And then from Standard Chartered, then you moved to India.
Yeah.
How was that like?
Well, serendipity, once again. In fact, Nikhil and I often talk about this. We actually met in a bar, which is one of the best places to meet. So Nikhil Kamath, many, I'm sure all of you in this room know. I mean, as a foreigner who used to come to India occasionally, I'd obviously never heard of him and I'd never heard of Zerodha, but we were introduced, we became friends nearly 5 years ago now. And he and his brother, of course, had achieved then amazing things with Zerodha, you know, even better now, and really changed the way that Indians across the entire country can do things that perhaps in the West we've taken for granted in terms of access to equity markets and investments and so on. And he was thinking of, as a very skilled, accomplished trader, managing his own prop book, he was thinking about doing that for third party. He, you know, he and I are yin and yang. I'm, you know, for starters, I think I'm 18 years older than he is. He's, you know, a million times more intelligent than I am. But I enjoy running things. I enjoy, you know, that end of running a business. Takes different skills, as all of you know. And so we came together and we started True Beacon, which is an asset management company, a wealth management company down in Bangalore about 4 years ago. And that's where we are. So that's why I live in Bangalore. I've been there for 4 years.
But what convinced you to make the move? I'm sure you had many other opportunities.
Nikhil. Yeah, I mean, he's a remarkable individual. I think that a couple of things, to be honest with you. One was, listen, I had this itch that I needed to scratch, which was India. You know, I had a love of India, but I'd never, okay, I'd come here on exchange with the Indian military, but I'd been pretty cocooned as a foreign officer. One is, you know, could I come back to India and have a chapter here as an Indian, effectively? Two, I used to handle all these billionaires. I used to talk to billionaires, but I wasn't an entrepreneur. I didn't know the struggles that you know. I only became an entrepreneur 4 years ago. You're far more experienced than I am. So I couldn't look at them straight in the eye. I thought it'd be cool. And if at the age of 50, back then 4 years ago, if I wasn't going to do it then, when was I going to do it? And then, but the biggest part was Nikhil. I thought he was an extraordinary young guy, and his brother, of course. And I loved his sense of trust and honesty and vision and what he wanted to achieve. And I just thought, here's a guy I can be friends with, I can also be a co-founder with, and so count me in. So yeah, so I quit and here I am, moved here to India.
Yeah, so was it a good move?
An amazing move, yeah? Amazing move. You know, if you're going to run a startup, and it did start from nothing, you have to do everything in your working day. You know, you need to go and meet a billionaire investor, but you also need to work out why the fund accounting needs to be institutionalized. You have to have discussions with custody. Some of this is not glamorous, the air conditioning in the office. Ultimately a CEO does everything, HR, and so on, particularly in the early days when you start it. I remember the first onboardings. What do I know about onboarding an Indian client and the rules and SEBI regulations and so on? But you have to start somewhere, and you build processes, you build people, and you build your client base. So I'd say this chapter has been even more exciting than my previous chapters. I feel very fortunate.
Yeah. Very so, we hear this thing that there's some people who are visionaries, who think of ideas, who think big, and then you have.
That's not me, by the way. Yeah, go on, carry on, yeah.
And then you have the builders.
Yeah.
Who actually bring those ideas into proper execution, right?
Yeah.
So do you subscribe to that?
Yeah, I do. And I'm serious. I often say this. I'm not a visionary. I'm not someone who could sit here and predict where the future of how Indian and global investors are going to allocate capital to investment opportunities. Yes, of course, I can see trends like all of us can, but I'm not that. My own personal, if I do have some skills, is about operations and taking those and relationships, operations and relationships. What I enjoy. I think, and again, I've been hearing about all the amazing stuff that you do here together as teams, and you've got 8 opportunities to build companies, and you don't have any, there'll be at least one, if not more of those. You've got 0 exposure to that industry before you start. And, I think when you've done that, and I've been on my journey now, you appreciate the fact that the highest performing teams in the world, including special forces from around the world, are deliberately composed of individuals who have very little overlap of professional competence. They have massive overlap in terms of trust, dependence, discipline, personal vision, but skill set is different. And I think that is very valuable.
How many of you would consider yourself builders and visionaries? And you don't know. Still got to figure it out. Interesting. I love the clarity in the room.
Yeah, it's cool.
That's
yeah,
good self-awareness.
Yeah. No, I'm a really firm believer in that. I think one of the things, especially here in India, I've noticed, maybe it's just because I've spent the last 4 years here, maybe it's happening around the world as well, but I'd say more so here. I think the one thing that has changed significantly over the 35 years or so I've been in the working world is that if I don't know, I should find out, the average age, we're a small little team, 50 or so people in True Beacon. I'd say the average age, take me out of the equation, because obviously that skews the data enormously, but the average age is probably something like 28 or something.
Yeah.
But at the grand old age, 54, 55, I love what I honestly learn from a 22-year-old who rocks into my office, or I go to their desk or whatever, it's all open plan. I have almost 0 competence, less than 0 competence at coding, the manipulation of data, using huge sample sets. That's just not my bag, not my forte. And actually I've left it, yes, I could devote 4 hours of my day every day and maybe that would lead me somewhere. But at my stage in life, it's probably better for me.
Your job is to bring them together.
Yeah, which is cool. But I think working cross functions, cross disciplines, but the big point is across age, is the way to go. I think I get rolled out for my experience, for my receding hairline, and the fact that I still wear a suit.
The hairline is not too bad. Half of us don't have that.
So I think that's the way things will go. And I'm sure many of you, when you leave here or now, you probably have enrolled people to be mentors, not because they're more proficient than you, it's just they've had other life experiences and networks, and that's...
What is it like to work with Nitin and Nikhil? I guess more so with Nikhil.
No, I think, I wrote a little article on Hello magazine, or someone asked that they were doing top 100 people in India, and I wrote a short thing on him for them the other day. So I'm reminded, I had to think. But first of all, honesty, integrity, and trust, I think since I've known him, have made him really stand out. And by the way, I think the fact that he was invited over to the White House by the Prime Minister recently to represent this country and commerce in this country is very, I think we were all thrilled about that. I think that people like him, men and women like him, that younger generation who are, excuse the cliche, but disrupting industries, but the way that we think, and this country is able to participate in wealth generation. It is very valuable. So that's number one. Secondly, I think he's an amazing guy in making a decision, having a vision, but then being very delegating that the operational road journey, if you like.
Is he very involved, or does he let you be?
No, he lets me. I mean, again, we've got to be very mindful of his time. We have to work out both of our time. And every member of True Beacon, we have to work out where their time is best employed. And so we do that, but he's very much involved strategically, of course. And, no one better in India to get views on markets, of course, but also the vision of the company and the way forward.
So I want to touch a little bit upon working in the UK versus working in India. What are the challenges working in the UK? What are the challenges working in India?
Yeah.
How have you felt the difference?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with when I first came here, before, I'm guessing, many of you were born 30 years ago. You don't have to put your hands up if you're over 30. But anyway, the journey that India has been on, even in the 1990s, an exciting kind of place to be, kind of. You could see regulation, deregulation was going to drive the country. And even back when I lived here in 2006, I'd hear the mantra, India's time is now. But to be honest with you, we were, a little bit cynical, I think, then, and probably rightly so, because the ingredients weren't there. I think now, particularly in the last 5 years, this undoubtedly, and I'm not saying it to flatter you, ladies and gentlemen, but this is the place on the planet to be for the next 10 years if you are starting a company, if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to build something yourself. And that is a confluence of lots of different things coming together. First and foremost, amazing human capital coming out of universities like this one across the entire country. Secondly, geopolitically, where India is and where the administration, whatever, it's not a political point, but the administration has provided continuity of government here, which has propelled India on the global stage, and net that is good for India Inc. And then last but not least, you've got a population here. Obviously, it's the largest, most populous country on the planet. It's the biggest democracy on the planet. But you have a consumer that is quite rightly highly aspirational. And that all bodes well for decades to come. And as this country is now obviously the 5th largest economy, will reach the 3rd largest economy relatively shortly in sort of macro terms. I think that's all incredibly exciting. And then last but not least, our friends up to the north, depending on your geopolitical view, but clearly that we are not in a bipolar world anymore. India has got a huge role to play on the global stage. That you don't need a foreigner like me to tell you that. Less than a month after the G20 meeting hosted here in this city, that type of influence is only getting larger and larger. And my last point is this. I think most of us in this room would agree, if you look at the biggest threats to humanity in your lifetime, probably not in mine, but in your lifetime, they are absolutely centered around the achievement or not of the Sustainable Development Goals. we are woefully behind the curve on achieving those goals. And if you look at India, India's thousands of years of history, how we live our lives here in India, how focused we are, some of the innovations that we're developing here in India, specifically around perhaps climate change, but many of the other SDGs, I think India's got a massive contribution to make to achieving those. And so the world needs India going forward. It needs it, like I would argue, like it hasn't needed.
If I were to ask this crowd right now that there is a job opportunity in, I don't know, Ireland, I know 100% would apply, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen that, I mean, in cohort 1, cohort 2, and so how do we keep people here? I mean, we still have like 1 million Indians leaving India every year, and of the most skilled ones.
Yeah, I think as for something else, I think someone told me that 750,000 Indian students go overseas every year. Hey, listen, I've got 3 kids. 2 of them are in America at American universities. You went to an American university. I think there's I think I look at it from the other side of things. We were chatting on this just before we walked in. In fact, you corrected me, thank you for that. But I think it was somewhere between 30 and 40,000 foreign students are here today in India across all academic years. That is ridiculous. If 750,000 Indian students go overseas and only 30,000 come here.
No, it's 40,000 across all years.
I know, all years,
all
3 or 4 years or whatever. It's ridiculous. And then of those 40,000, that most of the lion's share be regional. So we've got a couple, maybe even it's a few hundreds and thousands from places like the US or Europe or whatever. First of all, we need to accelerate that in India. I think we need to bring young people to India because that will give them, for what's in it for India, you get people at a very young age to have a cultural affinity with this country. Also, just like me when I was a foreign student serving with Indian military officers all that 16 years ago, I think most of you would think it would be valuable if you had a handful of foreigners here from all over the world. Because you get to know them and they might not be, natural bedfellows, geopolitically, just for example, but, is it useful to know what's going on in China and how entrepreneurs there think? Absolutely. We should learn now. Whether we want to repeat what they're doing, that's another story, but we should get that view. Do we want to know what's happening in South America right now, in emerging markets in this area like Vietnam? Of course we do. And so I think that's very additive. But to your point about, I think, yes, we're seeing a lot of people going overseas, but I think we're seeing a lot of people come back to India now. That's what I sense.
Yeah. There were 17 of us Indians in my college. Out of 17, 16 are now back in India.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So people like Wharton educated, they all want to come back to India because this is where the opportunity is. Yet I think in our limited worldview, we end up, applying to those jobs in Ireland. Like, might as well give it a shot.
Yeah, I don't know how Ireland figured so prominently.
Google has headquarters there.
Oh, really? Okay, fine. I wouldn't recommend going there, to be honest with you. No, listen, I think there are opportunities all over the world. I think that what's really changing, in fact, do you mind if I do a straw poll? How many of you have traveled outside, who has not traveled outside India? Never been outside India. I'm guessing that's about 30%. On the other end of the scale, who has worked outside India, actually had a job? That's probably about 3% or something like that, isn't it? 2% or something. To work outside India, got a job outside India. I know you're relatively early in your careers. But I think that what do we aspire for our children as, middle-aged and old people like me? We aspire for our children to be global, tolerant, well-educated individuals who can walk into a business meeting, into a social situation, virtually anywhere on the planet, and not to have a jarring difference of opinions, but to have a very good understanding of where we all come from on this planet. And so I think as all of us, including all of you guys, do more travel, that is just going to be second nature. And, it won't be quite so weird for a middle-aged white guy in a suit to come and chat to you, and it'll just be
Usual.
normal.
Normal.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears and talk about wealth management a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Now it's been what, 15, 20 years of wealth management experience. How's this industry? I mean, like if we have a bunch of people who will be joining the industry next year, why should they join wealth management? Should they join wealth management? What kind of opportunities exist?
I should find out who's thinking of going into wealth management in the. Okay. And what type of, if I could ask as well to shout out, what type of wealth management, what do you want to do? Do you want to be a founder? What do you want to do roughly? Do you know yet? You want to? But in what role do you want to? But do you want to be a manufacturer, or do you want to be a kind of a private banker, sort of private banker? Gosh, we'll come back to him later. What's your name? Saurav. Okay, we'll come back to Saurav, the private banker, in a moment. What about everyone else who put their hands up? Yeah.
I was working in the ICICI Securities as a sell-side banker.
Okay.
So I've seen how things work on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
Being quite fancy for me to work on the buy side.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Who else had their hand up? Yeah.
Fund management.
Aman. Fund manager. Okay. Cool. The trader. Anyone else? Yeah.
VC.
You want to do VC, so private. Great.
Early stage venture capital.
Okay. Fine. Anyone else? No? Yes.
Yeah.
VC as well. Yeah. So I think, so how is the industry changing? It's changing very quickly. I mean, I think, Zerodha is a great case study of how an industry, you can have the status quo for decades, and then for it to suddenly change. So I refer you to my previous comment. I'm not the visionary to tell you how the industry is going to go in the future. But obviously technology is going to play an even larger part. My own kids occasionally ask me for advice. My own son actually has just got a job with an American bank. And is anyone here thinking about going into consultancy? Anyone want to go into consultancy? I mean, the only thing I would say is I think you have to kind of see where tech, and in particular AI, is going. Which industries are going to be most disrupted? And possibly, consultancy might be absolutely high on the list for AI. I mean, if you look at consultants, we can all call up a McKinsey or a EY consultant tomorrow to tell us this, that, and the other. What's AI going to be able to do in the future? So I think if you're going into wealth, first thing I would say is find something that, the truism these days, find something you enjoy, first of all. For goodness sake, don't just chase money. Money is important in life, but having real enjoyment of it about your job and matching that to your own skill set is really important. Secondly, I'd say if you are thinking about starting your own company, for possibly doing a year or two in the mainstream world, because that old adage, poacher turned gamekeeper. There is something in business. You go and work for a big international bank or something. You know how the status quo is, and therefore you can understand how you could disrupt that or change it. So I think anything that you can have a bit of a moat around your role within that, and relationships have that. Or you can actually be the disruptor. You can use technology to destroy established business models. Are obviously going to do very well. Finally, I'd say on wealth management, it depends what type of client you have. We at True Beacon, we operate exclusively in the high net worth, ultra high net worth space. They are predominantly dominated by relationships and are, touch wood, less open to disruption by technology.
Yep. Sales will continue.
But we now need to be more agile about investors. I think 5 years ago, an investor was given by their financial institution, this is the way you're going to monitor your investments, this is the reporting mechanism, this is how you're going to contact us. It was one size fits all. Now I think we have 95-year-old clients, but we also have 25-year-old clients. The 95-year-old client might never want to talk to a relationship manager counterintuitively and just want a tech solution, whereas the 25-year-old wants a good old-fashioned relationship manager role. So we need to be a lot more agile about servicing the needs of clients.
I mean, like, we read all the time that AI is a much better fund manager than human fund managers, right?
Yeah.
So my sense is that that's only going to improve over time. And then a lot of wealth management and private banking would be about actually bringing more clients and increasing assets under management, right? So the 30 people that you have, you mentioned, I think, in True Beacon, what's the makeup of that team?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because one of them has just walked into the room. Kriti, hello. You happen to be here in Delhi, where we've got business meetings together. But anyway, so I won't embarrass you too much. But we have effectively we run two verticals within the company. We manufacture products. That is being a fund manager for both alternative investment funds, pooled investment vehicles, and also portfolio management services. That's where we produce model for portfolios for our clients. That's the lead business, if you like. It's how I started. We started our life 4 years ago, and then we do a little bit of wealth management for a handful of clients, and that is across all asset classes. So what disciplines do we need? First and foremost, we need amazing young men and women who are derivatives traders, long only, equity analysts, researchers, brokers. We need a lot of tech in terms of analyzing 10 years worth of back-tested data across the whole nifty universe. We need to buy that data publicly. We then need to synthesize all of those together. We then need people who are fantastic at coding. We then need, obviously, risk and compliance. We need fund accountants. We need marketing and comms specialists, because we don't do any partnerships. We kind of just, a lot of it is word of mouth. And then we need relationship managers like our Kriti here in the audience, who may be handling many clients and so on. And so, and finance specialists and so on, and operations. So it's when you say wealth management, it covers a very broad spectrum. What I would say, just as if you haven't been in finance before, to be honest with you, when I first started with Standard Chartered, I was going into finance. I thought it would be the most boring job on the planet. Finance, how dull and boring. But of course, another truism is that your clients represent every single industry on the planet. Everything. And so if you're in a client-facing role, it's the broadest job you can have, because obviously every single enterprise needs finance, and so you have access. So if you enjoy that, as I do, it's a great place to be.
Yeah. Why should these students consider True Beacon as a potential workplace in the future?
I think we actually do, not that you'll be looking for an internship, for goodness sakes, because you're going on to bigger and better things, but we actually have our own internship program, and we are very fortunate to attract young men and women from not only across the country, but also internationally, who've been to some of the best universities. I think I would say a small company and we are a small company, and we're also a young company, is very different to a well-established, particularly multinational Indian finance house. You can go and do an internship, we can go in the job with JP Morgan and so on. But I think your ability to learn and be given responsibility is by definition going to be larger in a smaller organization, if that makes sense. And so if you turn up on day one and you have a hunger to learn, and you can prove yourself, when you're in this growth of a business and you're not a well-established HDFC or ICICI or JP Morgan, some bright young man or woman will say, "Hey, Richard, Nikhil, I've just seen a great business opportunity to do X, or I've noticed that we could fulfill their needs by doing Y." We're small, and as long as it's allowed, and the regulators, we're not doing anything that we're not allowed to do under our licenses, and as long as it doesn't take crawls and crawls and crawls, and it's like, go for gold, go and try it out, come back, try it out, come back in a month or a week or a day or whatever, tell me how it's doing, pilot, and off we go. So I think wherever you end up next, on the one hand, you'd probably, if you're not going to go immediately into your own startup, you probably need to do a bit of brand building, perhaps, and getting experience in different larger organizations. But also you need the ability to seize an opportunity, deliver on it, and be given greater responsibility. And in fact, I won't embarrass Akriti by telling you how TrueBeacon found her. She was in a client-facing role, had zero finance background, but has been with us as a relationship manager and has been very successful. And so it's totally possible not to do things the way it's been done for decades, but to do things in new ways.
You know, one of the things that I battle with a lot of the students is that most of them, even if they may not agree today, look down upon anything that's not finance or consulting or product management. So anything that has an air of sales in it, they want to run away.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I always feel that sales is central to any organization.
Yeah.
That's where the money comes in from. And as founders, we're always selling, right?
Yeah.
As CEOs, we're always selling. So
Totally.
how do we try to get them on the other side of the fence? Say, hey, listen, let me give a shot to sales as well.
Yeah, I think, listen, whether you want to call it sales or I prefer to call it effective communication, I think that all of us, no matter what we're doing in the world, communication is absolutely front and center of what we need to do. None of us, if you don't communicate, well, if you didn't communicate, you wouldn't be here, well, number one. When you're going out into the job world, you know, okay, you've got a great university on your CV and stuff. Have you seen the competition out there? Have you seen the competition? Now, the good news is there are some amazing opportunities, but you all have to sell yourself. No one just gives you a job for nothing. And when you've got your job, you need to then sell yourself again. Every single day you turn up, you have to sell yourself to clients, you have to sell yourself to your boss. So I agree with you. Now, does that mean that we all need to be top right-hand corner on the spectrum of being, you know, introvert, in and out? No. But it means that, you know, a lot of people are very introverted. I was very shy as a teenager. I hated that, but I had to, for my job, I had to start communicating. I had to start standing up in front of people, giving speeches and whatever it was. And it's not comfortable when you start. But after a while, I know I'm seeing outside, you've got, you know, recording cameras. I'm sure you do us a lot during this course. But it's really central. You can call it sales, you can call it comms, but without the ability to project your own personal brand, then you have to rely on others. And that's, you know, that's not disastrous. But if you're going to be a startup founder and you're going to be at the origin of that box I spoke about, and you don't enjoy communicating, and make sure your co-founder is there and you've got someone who can project you and the brand.
Yeah. What's the vision for TrueBeacon going forward? What motivates Nikhil?
Yeah.
What motivates you?
I think what motivated us to start are probably very different. Again, he'd been a private banking client. I'd worked for a private bank. We wanted to change perhaps how we could service the needs of high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals. I think we've always been focused on three things. One, creating great products, front and center of any business, of course. Two, being very competitive with our fee model. Again, easier said than done in our industry. But thirdly, I think, not that this is necessarily vision, but what we've both really enjoyed doing is building a community of amazing entrepreneurs. Everything from, you know, C-suite leaders here in India through to double-digit billionaires, and just how vibrant that community is, and connecting those people together and making it valuable for them, and not just making it a blind investment that you could put in any wealth management house across the world, but actually to bring it alive, if you like, and to give it strategic value. And I think if you can give your business strategic value, then your clients bank with you, in our case, do business with you, not just for the day job of what you do, but also the relationship and the value add.
Thank you.
That's lovely.
We'll take a customary
Yeah,
picture.
great, of course.
Awesome.
Yeah.